So a little bit of review and application in this particular section. So the spending multiplier, remember, magnifies new spending into higher income and output, where each round of spending becomes income to someone else. Multiplier is equal to 1 divided by 1 minus the MPC. If we have a marginal propensity to consume of 0.6, our multiplier is equal to 2.5. So any new spending through consumption, investment, government spending, or net exports is going to be multiplied 2.5 times in terms of aggregate or equilibrium income. So a $100 increase in new spending, just suppose we have government spending here, generates $250 in aggregate output or income. And this is going to be very helpful for government officials and policymakers in order for us to get out of a recession. We don't need to have a full $250 of spending. We only need a portion of that because the multiplier effect is going to come into play. So take a look at this long-run aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply, and aggregate demand curves based on what we've built up so far, and we want to see exactly the multiplier in action. At point E, we are in a recession. We have price level P0, and we notice that our GDP or output level Q0 is less than our full employment level, so our Q star. So we need to have some type of increases in spending in order to push us back to our long-run equilibrium. So suppose that the GDP gap right here is $250 million. We don't need to increase spending by $250 million. We only need a portion of that due to the multiplier effect. So in this case, if our multiplier is equal to 2.5, based on the numbers that were given to us previously, we only need to have an increase of spending of $100 in order to push our aggregate demand curve over to the right as such, and that will lead us to our long-run equilibrium at point A, where all three of our curves are intersecting with one another. We have pushed ourselves out of the recession. We're back to our Q star level of output. So essentially, the multiplier is a very powerful tool in order to help us get out of a recession, and this is what we see graphically using the model that we built up for this chapter. And one great example of this is going to be using the Great Depression. So during the Great Depression, short-run equilibrium output was far below full employment. So we were in a very, very bad recession. Real GDP fell by nearly 40%, unemployment reached 25%, investment fell precipitously, consumption fell as well, and we noticed that aggregate demand shifted far to the left. So here we have aggregate demand shifting all the way over to the left, so we'll be somewhere over right here, and that just precipitated the need for increases in spending, magnified by the spending multiplier, in order to push us out. And it wasn't really until we got into World War II where we had a huge increase in government spending to shift our aggregate demand curve back to the long-run equilibrium. So graphically, what does this mean for us? So suppose that at the beginning of 1929, we were in long-run equilibrium where all three curves are intersecting, but the Great Depression hit, and every single year it caused a shift of our aggregate demand curve over to the left, huge demand, negative demand shock, and we noticed that, hey, we are in a very big recession right here. Our real GDP is much lower than our potential GDP, so we are in a huge recession. We noticed that consumption dropped by nearly 20%, investment dropped by nearly 80%, so these are all affected by the multiplier, remember, so these are huge shifts over to the left towards the origin. We had a small increase in government spending during this time period, but this is paltry compared to these two components right here, so only 6% increase in government spending. That did not far outweigh, this was far outweighed by the decreases in consumption and investment, which led us to being in a very bad economic situation for quite a while. It wasn't until we had huge increases in government spending with World War II that helped push the aggregate demand curve back to its long-run equilibrium and back to our long-term Q star level of GDP. So a little bit of a review, a little bit of application based on the aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply models that we've sort of built up within this chapter with the Great Depression. And we're going to go ahead and take a closer look at these simultaneous shifts of supply and demand by taking a look at two special cases of inflation with demand pull inflation and cost push inflation, both of each which have its own idiosyncratic sort of features and characteristics that we need to delve into with the channels and mechanisms of each. Also give you a few applications of each of these examples as well. So we'll talk about the demand pull inflation next, and then we'll finish up the chapter by taking a look at cost push inflation.